Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? The radio had gone silent only a minute ago, but the silence now felt heavier than any sound. Sergeant Miles O'Connor gone. The man who had taught her how to rebuild a rifle blindfolded. The one who'd stayed up with her during her first deployment, reminding her that precision came from calm, not courage. Now his name echoed through static. Sergeant Miles O'Connor, KIA. Ava Marlowe froze mid-motion, the rag in her hand still pressed against cold steel. For a second, even the hum of the base generator seemed to fade. Her breath caught in her throat. She wanted to close her eyes, but she didn't. She stood there, perfectly still, because if she moved, it would make it real. Behind her, someone snickered. "Crybabies at it again," one of them muttered, half under his breath but loud enough for the others to hear. Another voice followed with a smirk. "She'll be sobbing over the coffee maker next." Ava didn't turn around, not even an inch. She simply finished cleaning her weapon, checked the bolt twice, and walked out of the barracks. The corridor lights flickered faintly above her, casting long shadows on the concrete. Her boots made no sound. The world was already loud enough. She walked straight to the range. 15 rounds. 75 meters. 15 hits. No hesitation, no wasted breath. The paper target disintegrated into dust and holes under her precision. Every trigger pull was a question turned into silence. When the last casing hit the floor, she lowered her rifle. The others were gone. They hadn't stayed to see it. They never did. They only remembered her tears, never her aim. While they slept, she studied. While they joked, she listened. While they called her crybaby, she mapped every sound the desert made. And somewhere in that endless silence, she began to notice something that others didn't. It started small, a shift in the wind, a strange absence of birds near the northern ridge, patrols that came back too quiet, too pale, eyes hollow as if they'd seen something they didn't understand. Even the sand seemed restless, scraping like metal across stone. She started logging everything in a small, battered notebook, but she didn't map terrain. She mapped emotion. Fear, confidence, hesitation. Ava called it her empathy grid. A map not of Earth, but of human instinct. It was her secret language, the only one that ever told the truth. Night after night, under dim flashlight glow, she drew patterns that others would call madness. Red ink for fear, black for control, and each mark brought her closer to something forming at the edge of the page, a convergence of emotion and silence over a single place, Raven's Hollow Pass. Not a valley, not a route. A trap. One night she felt eyes on her. She looked up, startled. Staff Sergeant Reyes stood a few feet away, watching the strange web of lines spread across her knees. He crouched beside her quietly, scanning the page. "You missed a crosswind channel there," he murmured after a pause, tapping one corner of the grid with his finger. Then he stood and walked off into the dark. He never mentioned it again. But Ava never forgot. He had seen something, even if he didn't understand what. The next morning, the siren tore through the air. "Attention all personnel, enemy movement detected, northern ridge. Estimated contact window, 72 hours. Outside chaos, soldiers rushing across the compound. Crates stacked, orders shouted, the metallic clatter of readiness. Ava didn't move. She stood by the doorway, watching dust swirl in the wind. That was the same ridge she'd circled 3 weeks earlier, the same place the birds had fled, the same coordinates that made her stomach twist. She ran to her quarters, tore open her duffel, and grabbed the notebook. The pattern glared back at her. Every red vein, every mark, every tremor of fear she'd charted, it all pointed to one place. Raven's Hollow Pass. A perfect funnel. A flawless kill zone. She didn't think twice. Helmet on, notebook in hand, she sprinted toward the command post. Inside, Major Grant Harlan stood over a map, giving orders with the detached calm of a man who'd already made up his mind. Two lieutenants hovered nearby, nodding without listening. Ava burst in. "Sir, we're walking into a trap," she said, breath steady but urgent. "Raven's Hollow is low ground. If they strike from the ridge, they'll force us right into it." Harlan didn't look up. "And where exactly did you get that intelligence specialist?" "Patterns, sir. I've been tracking their movements for weeks. Their patrols, their timings." "Patterns?" he sighed, finally glancing her way. "Your logistics, not recon, not command. Stay in your lane, Marlowe." Lane. The word hit harder than any insult. Ava stood there, her pulse pounding, trying to hold the anger down. "Sir, if I'm right." "That's an order," he snapped, turning back to his table. "We'll handle it." She saluted mechanically, turned, walked out. The desert wind met her on the steps, low, metallic, dragging across rock like something alive. It vibrated through her bones. Somewhere in that sound, she could already hear what was coming. "They won't listen," she whispered. Then she tightened her strap, closed the notebook, and murmured to herself, "Then I'll be ready." The ground trembled once beneath her boots, distant, faint, the prelude of something vast. The first mortar hit at 6:42. The explosion ripped through the western wall. A shockwave rolled through the compound like the breath of a beast awakening. Dust swallowed the dawn. Ava hit the ground, ears ringing, mouth full of grit, chest thundering. Shattered glass rained down. The world dissolved into fire and motion. She rolled behind a crate, smoke, screams, orders shouted into broken comms. Someone ran past dragging a wounded man. The air smelled of metal and fuel. When she looked up, the motor pool was a storm of fire. Vehicles twisted, flames clawing at the sky. She grabbed her rifle and ran. Every heartbeat was survival. Inside the command post, chaos. Voices layered over static. "Evac all non-combatants. Alpha, hold the ridge. Delta, cover the pass." Orders overlapping like noise. Ava pushed through the doorway, coughing. "Sir, you can't send them south. It's a funnel," she yelled. "Not now, Marlowe," Harlan barked. "They're herding us right into the kill zone," she insisted. "I've tracked it for weeks." He turned sharply. "Unless you've got drone footage, you're guessing." "I'm reading the pattern," she shouted back. "Everything they've done leads there." Before he could answer, the door slammed open. Rays stumbled in, half covered in blood. "They breached the east gate," he gasped. 20, maybe 30, moving hard. Ava caught him as he fell, his hand gripping her sleeve. His voice was barely a whisper. "You were right, should have said something sooner." Medics pulled him away. The room froze. Even the radios fell quiet. Ava looked back at Harlan. "Sir," she said softly, "I'll stay." He frowned. "What?" "I'll hold the base. Reinforcements ETA, 6 hours, 40 minutes. I'll buy time." "You can't stop 90 men alone," he said, starring. "I don't plan to stop them," she replied. "I plan to make them believe they're already losing." Something flickered in his eyes. Not faith, not trust, something closer to guilt. Then he stepped aside. No salute, no command, just silence. Permission wrapped in disbelief. Outside, the world burned. The western horizon glowed orange. Smoke churned like storm clouds. Ava sprinted toward the northern tower, rifle clutched, lungs burning. By the time she reached the top, the sun had barely crested the ridge. Through her scope, she saw them, dark shapes moving with discipline, spread wide, sweeping in arcs. Not raiders, soldiers. She ducked, pulled open her pack, and started setting up. 9 firing positions, each stocked with water, ammo, and a decoy. Old comm units wired to speakers, looping pre-recorded commands in different voices. "Alpha, flank right. Bravo, hold fire. Sniper team, mark and wait." Ava had recorded those weeks ago, stolen moments, fake voices, fragments of an army that didn't exist. Now they would be her reinforcements. From her first perch, she sighted the lead scout and exhaled. The trigger broke, one shot, one fall. The second wave hesitated. Return fire came, wild and scattered. They didn't know where she was. Perfect. She moved again, crawling, ducking, firing from another angle. 10 seconds, another shot, another echo. To them, it sounded like a dozen shooters spread across the compound. For the next hour, Black Ridge Outpost became a ghost base. Muzzle flashes blinked from random corners. Radios spat false orders. Footprints appeared and vanished across sand. The air itself began to lie. Ava never stayed in one place more than 2 minutes. Sweat stung her eyes, dust burned her throat, and still she kept moving. The illusion had to hold. Every hesitation she caused was another life bought, another convoy spared. By the time her watch ticked past the second hour, her arms trembled with exhaustion. Her canteen was half empty, her lips cracked. She pressed her back to the cold concrete and whispered, 2 down, 6 to go. In the distance, gunfire rattled off the ridge. She adjusted her sights, eyes narrowing. Her mind was sharp. Her body was shaking. Her heart steady. She thought of O'Connor then. Of how he used to say, "You win the fight before it begins, if you listen long enough." Ava smiled faintly. "I'm listening, Sarge." The ridge growled with distant fire, and she moved again, vanishing into smoke. Hours would pass before anyone realized she was still alive. But in that first night, as the desert wind howled across Black Ridge, one truth became certain. She was done being crybaby. By sunrise, that word would mean something else entirely. What does courage sound like when there's no one left to hear it? The sky above Black Ridge Outpost was a bruised gray now, a slow storm of smoke and dust folding over the base. The sun, once sharp and merciless, had vanished behind the haze, leaving behind a light that felt more like memory than day. Ava crouched beneath the broken frame of a communications tower, adjusting the sight on her rifle. The air was heavy. Every breath tasted of cordite and ash. She had lost count of the bodies she'd seen through her scope, not because she wanted to, but because her mind had started to blur the moments together into one endless rhythm. Reload, move, fire, breathe. Each motion was a heartbeat, each pause a prayer. Her radio hissed quietly in the dirt beside her, the faint buzz of static washing through. No voices, no orders, just the sound of the world unraveling slowly, grain by grain. She pulled the notebook from her vest, the one she'd risked everything for. Pages torn, edges burned, but the pattern still lived there. Red ink veins converging around Raven's hollow. Every mark a pulse of instinct, every line a reflection of fear, not theirs but hers. She flipped the page open and pressed her thumb over the central point. The ink had bled, like blood soaked into paper. "They're coming in waves," she murmured under her breath. Testing, listening, adapting. Her voice was almost gone, dry, cracked, but still steady. She tore a strip from the map, crumpled it into her fist, and stuffed it into her pocket. There was no time to plan anymore, only to react. Outside, a faint crunch echoed boots against gravel. She turned sharply, rifle up. Nothing, just wind brushing against shattered glass. But then another sound, closer. A whisper of motion through smoke. Ava slid behind a collapsed wall, exhaling through her nose, eyes narrowing through the rifle's scope. The world tightened into a circle. Her trigger finger rested soft and light. 2 shadows emerged through the haze. Scout slow, cautious. She watched them scan, step by step, unaware of the faint red glint reflecting from her lens. She waited, one heartbeat, 2. The shot cracked like lightning, then silence. The second man froze, dropped to one knee, and fired wildly into the dust. Ava had already moved. She was gone before the echo faded. That was the rhythm of her survival, always one thought ahead, one breath behind. The kind of discipline born not from training, but from desperation. By hour 3, she'd lost track of time completely. The sky hadn't changed color, only texture, smoke giving way to smog, smog to shadow. Every minute bled into the next. Ava crouched behind a half-destroyed bunker, her knuckles scraped raw. Sweat streaked her face, mixing with soot. The dirt beneath her palms was warm, the kind of warmth that only death leaves behind. She pressed her ear to the radio again. This time voices. Low, foreign, deliberate, the enemy. They were closing in. Multiple shooters, unknown count, maintain distance. They're using recorded comms, a voice crackled through the static. Another answered, confirmed, single operative suspected. Rotating positions. We're dealing with a phantom. Her stomach twisted. They figured it out. She felt it in her chest, the shift, the illusion cracking. Her decoy chaos was starting to fade. They were learning her rhythm. She closed her eyes for a moment and let fear in just long enough to feel it. Then she let it go. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for the voice modulator. She adjusted the frequency, added static, dropped her voice an octave. Her tone shifted from human to command. East flank collapsing, she whispered into the mic. Rays bleeding out, request immediate evac, we're losing ground. The words spilled like lies wrapped in truth. Her voice trembled just enough to sound real. She waited, heart hammering. Then a reply on their own channel. Copy that, confirmed. They're breaking, push forward. Her lips curled into a faint, exhausted smile. They swallowed it, she breathed. She dropped the mic, pulled the bolt on her rifle, and aimed toward the valley. Through her scope, she watched their formation shift. The enemy poured downhill, 30 men at least, storming the base like a wave, believing victory was within reach. She waited until they were in the open. Then she pulled the cord beside her. A steel silhouette jerked upright in the smoke, a dummy she'd stuffed with sandbags and wrapped in a bloodied uniform. The moment it moved, the attackers opened fire. Tracers lit up the fog like red rain. Ava moved through the chaos, firing from the side. 4 shots. 4 silhouettes dropped before they even realized they weren't under attack. They were inside a trap. The ridge erupted with confusion. Snipers, someone screamed. They're everywhere. The rest scattered. Some fired into smoke. Some dove behind rocks. They weren't fighting her anymore. They were fighting their own panic. Hour 4. Ava ducked behind a cracked wall, panting, blood on her cheek. She didn't even know whose. The rifle barrel burned her glove, too hot to touch. Her muscles screamed, but she couldn't stop. The deception was holding. Barely. From the ridge, enemy spotters swept with infrared scopes, scanning for heat signatures. She crouched lower, pressing her body against the cool stone. Her pulse slowed. She barely breathed. Through the scope of a fallen enemy rifle, she caught her reflection, her face blackened with soot, eyes sharp, jaw set. She didn't look like a soldier anymore. She looked like a ghost. Then a voice crackled again through the static. Foxtrot Command confirms single operative, female, north perimeter, finish it. She closed her eyes. For a second, the weight of that sentence pressed down on her chest like the edge of a blade. They knew. They knew it was her. Something inside her shifted, not fear, not pride, something deeper, a strange kind of calm. She adjusted her scope again, whispered softly to no one, then come find me. She fired twice, and the ridge answered with an avalanche of gunfire. The walls exploded around her, concrete splintering into dust. She rolled, hit the ground, and kept moving, crawling through debris toward the depot. The blast heat pressed against her back like a furnace. Her lungs ached. Her throat was raw. Still, she kept her rhythm. Reload, move, fire, breathe. By hour 5, exhaustion became her shadow. Every muscle in her body begged her to stop. Her ears rang from hours of recoil. Her fingers were bleeding where the gloves had torn. Yet she kept whispering orders into the comm system, each line designed to create confusion. Bravo, advance on my mark. Charlie, suppress the ridge. Sniper 2, hold position. The voices played back across the speakers she'd planted, bouncing through the valley. A full platoon that didn't exist. The enemy hesitated again. She could hear their disbelief through the open channels, disbelief turning into fear. This doesn't make sense, one voice said. There's too many of them. Ava smiled faintly, crouched behind a sandbag wall and whispered, "That's the idea." She lifted her rifle, sighted another target and squeezed the trigger. Click. Her stomach dropped. The bolt jammed. She slammed the buttstock against the ground, cleared the chamber, racked the bolt again. Nothing. Her weapon was dead. Footsteps closed fast. Ava reached for her sidearm. The shadow filled the doorway. She fired twice, center mass. The figure crumpled, falling hard, weapon clattering across the floor. She didn't look at his face. She couldn't afford to. She just moved. Reflex kept her alive when thought became dangerous. She scavenged a fresh magazine from the fallen soldier's vest and climbed the stairs to a new nest above the depot. Her lungs heaved, breath shallow. The horizon beyond the ridge blurred. The wind changed, a storm building. And then another transmission. Air support inbound, a voice said. They've got aircraft moving in. Ava froze, then laughed quietly under her breath. It was her own lie echoing back through their frequency. She'd broadcast that message 20 minutes earlier. And now they believed it. Below her, movement, dozens breaking formation, dragging their wounded, retreating into the dust. Confusion became panic. Panic became collapse. She keyed the mic again and let her voice carry through every loudspeaker left standing. Alpha flank secure. Bravo advancing. Hold the line. Her tone was calm, commanding, the sound of a ghost giving orders. The ridge went silent. Then, like a wave pulling back from shore, the attackers began to withdraw. 5, 10, then 20, until the valley was empty. Only smoke and silence remained. Ava slumped against the wall, rifle slipping from her grip. The weapon clattered softly onto the dirt. Her body trembled uncontrollably now, every nerve buzzing with exhaustion and disbelief. For the first time in 8 hours, she let herself breathe. Her whisper was barely audible. "I can breathe." The wind brushed her cheeks soft, almost gentle now. The battlefield had gone quiet. No more radio chatter, no more gunfire, just the ticking of cooling metal and the faint hum of the desert wind. A single tear traced down her face, carving a clean line through the soot. It wasn't weakness. It wasn't grief. It was release. Somewhere behind her, the speakers still whispered her own voice, looping broken orders into an empty sky. Ava closed her eyes. Her body leaned against the sandbags, the rifle across her lap still warm. And for the first time, the silence didn't feel lonely. It felt earned. Far beyond the ridge, the first convoy approached, reinforcements, 6 hours too late. They would find her like that, sitting in the dirt, surrounded by echoes of war, her rifle cooling in her hands. But that was for later. For now, Ava Marlowe sat alone at the heart of a burned-out base, her mind replaying every decision, every breath, every choice that had kept her alive. And somewhere in the haze, she realized what she had really done. She hadn't defended the base. She had defended her belief that empathy was not weakness. That feeling was not failure. That understanding fear was the only way to outsmart it. The radio crackled once more, faint and broken. Static, then silence. And in that silence, she whispered the words that would one day echo through military halls for generations. Sometimes you don't win by killing more. You win by being the last one who still feels. What do you see when the smoke clears? Victory, or the cost of it? The horizon was a blur of gray and gold when the helicopters arrived. Morning light poured across the ruins of Black Ridge Outpost, soft and indifferent, as if the sun didn't care who had lived or died here. Ash drifted through the air like slow snow. The world smelled of burnt fuel, dust, and something faintly metallic, the scent of endings. The first osprey circled low, rotor wash kicking debris into spirals. Medics and soldiers inside squinted through the open ramp, searching the shattered compound below. All channels were silent. No friendly beacons, no signals. Just static. Then one medic leaned forward. "Sir, there's movement." Major Grant Harland gripped the side rail, eyes scanning through the haze. Below them in the courtyard sat a single figure. Still motionless. Rifle across her lap. Ave Marlowe. She didn't rise when the shadow of the helicopter fell over her. Didn't look up when the wind roared, scattering loose papers across the yard. She just sat there, head bowed slightly, as if she were still listening to something that only she could hear. When the skids touched ground, the medics rushed out first. Boots hit gravel. The courtyard crackled with the sound of movement for the first time in hours. One of them froze mid-step. "Sir," he whispered into his mic, "we've got someone." Harlan jumped down, helmet under his arm. He walked slowly, scanning the devastation. The walls were torn open by blasts, sandbags shredded. The perimeter fence sagged like broken ribs. The air was hot with the ghost of fire. And there, at the center of it all, Ava Marlowe sat. Alive. Barely. Her uniform was blackened, one sleeve torn at the shoulder. Her hair clung to her face, matted with soot and sweat. Her hands trembled slightly, the rifle still cradled like something sacred. Harlan stopped 3 feet away. The others hung back. No one spoke. Ava looked up. Her eyes were half-shaded beneath the grime, but still clear. She didn't salute, she didn't stand. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then Harland, the same man who had dismissed her, who had told her to stay in her lane, removed his helmet. His voice was quiet. "I was wrong." The words fell between them like a confession. Ava's reply was softer still, barely more than breath. "It's all right, sir, as long as you're listening now." He nodded once, not as a superior, but as a man stripped of rank, standing before someone who had seen what he couldn't. His gaze dropped to her rifle. The barrel was scorched, the stock worn smooth where her fingers had gripped it for hours. It was still warm. Behind them, a young soldier whispered to another, his voice trembling. "She's the one who held it all night." No cheer followed. No applause. Just silence, the kind of silence that weighs more than any noise. The medics approached carefully, like stepping into a church. When they lifted her onto the stretcher, she didn't resist. Her body shook, but her eyes stayed open, focused on the ridge beyond the smoke. Even now, she was mapping it, still tracking echoes no one else could see. Harland followed the medics toward the Osprey, boots crunching over shell casings and torn maps. As they passed the calm tower, something flickered on the edge of his vision, an old notebook, half buried in ash. He bent down, brushed the dust away, and opened it. The pages were filled with impossible patterns, not coordinates or battle plans, but curved lines, arrows, and circles drawn with red and black ink. Notes scribbled in the margins. "Fear spikes here. Confidence drops after contact. Silence before movement." It wasn't a tactical map. It was human behavior, emotion mapped like topography. He turned another page and found the center marked with a single word, Raven's Hollow. Harland exhaled slowly, closing the book. He stared at the horizon where the ridge still smoked. She warned him, and he hadn't listened. Hours later, the Osprey lifted off, leaving behind the ghost of a battlefield. Below them, Black Ridge Outpost looked almost peaceful now, the chaos frozen in stillness. Ava lay strapped to the stretcher near the rear hatch, oxygen mask over her mouth, eyes half closed. The medic beside her kept checking her pulse, murmuring updates into comms. Harlan sat across from her, helmet resting in his lap. He wanted to speak, but words felt clumsy, undeserving. So he didn't. He just watched her breathe. Each rise and fall of her chest, a quiet defiance against the laws of war. Days passed. The story spread faster than the truth could catch up. A lone soldier, 8 hours, 92 enemies, no reinforcements. By the time the official report was written, it had already turned into a legend. But Ava Marlowe didn't care for legends. She didn't even read the report. While others debated her tactics, her kill count, her psychological deception techniques, she sat in a quiet hospital room, staring out the window at the endless stretch of desert beyond the base. Her hands still shook when she tried to hold a pen. The muscles in her right arm had torn from recoil fatigue. She'd lost hearing in her left ear. Her body was a record of the hours that no one else had lived through. Sometimes she would close her eyes and still hear it, the echo of her own voice bouncing through empty speakers. Bravo advancing. Sniper team, hold fire. Phantom orders that had fooled the enemy and haunted her. But in those long hospital nights, she realized something she hadn't on the battlefield. She wasn't haunted by what she did. She was haunted by how right she had been, and how no one had listened until blood made it undeniable. 3 months later, she walked again. 6 months and she returned to duty, not in the field, but in a lecture hall. Fort Valor Tactical Academy, Nevada. The room was packed, cadets in crisp uniforms, sitting straight back, notebooks open, pens hovering, waiting. When Ava Marlowe stepped onto the stage, the whispering stopped instantly. Her hair was shorter now, her eyes sharper. The same notebook, burned and scarred, rested on the podium beside her. She didn't open with a salute or a speech. Just a story. They called me Crybaby, she began, her voice calm, steady. Because I cried when soldiers died, because I felt too much. A quiet ripple of discomfort moved through the room, cadets exchanging glances, unsure if they were allowed to react. What they never understood, she continued, is that empathy isn't weakness. It's intelligence, it's awareness, it's how you stay alive. Behind her, a projection flickered to life, a digital reconstruction of her empathy grid. The lines and curves she had drawn by hand now glowed blue across the screen. Each arrow and circle labeled not with military terms, but with emotions. Fear, doubt, hesitation, pride. I didn't just see the battlefield, she said softly. I felt it. I tracked morale the way others track wind direction. That's how I survived. She paused, eyes sweeping the hall. Every cadet leaned forward, silent. A hand rose in the back row. Ma'am, a young voice asked, what made you stay when everyone else stopped believing in you? Ava's gaze lingered on him for a moment. Her fingers brushed the cover of her notebook. I almost didn't, she admitted quietly. I almost burned this notebook, walked away, let it fade. She turned it sideways, and something small slid out from between the pages. A bent rifle casing, scarred and dull. It hit the podium with a faint metallic clink. This jammed round, she said, was from that morning, the one that almost ended everything. I kept it because it reminds me what hesitation costs. Her voice dropped lower, almost a whisper. If you see the truth and stay silent, you become the next blind spot. The words hung in the air like smoke after a blast. Even the instructors at the back, the old veterans who had once rolled their eyes at intuition and empathy, sat perfectly still. Ava closed the notebook gently and exhaled. Her final line came like a vow, cold and beautiful. A cold mind pulls the trigger. A burning heart wins the right fight. The applause began slowly, then it grew. But before it could swell into noise, Ava lifted her hand. This isn't about applause, she said softly. It's about learning to listen before the shooting starts. The room went quiet again. For a long moment, every cadet in that hall sat in silence, not out of discipline but out of reverence. They weren't looking at a hero. They were looking at a mirror, a reflection of what courage looks like when the world refuses to believe in it. When the lecture ended, the cadets filed out quietly, their boots echoing down the hall like the rhythm of an old march. Ava stayed behind. She stood by the window, watching the Nevada desert stretch out toward the horizon, endless and golden, the same color as that morning at Black Ridge. Her hand rested on the glass. The wind outside pressed against it, whispering faintly, almost like static. For a second, she could almost hear O'Connor's voice again. "You win the fight before it begins, if you listen long enough." She smiled faintly. On the table behind her, her phone buzzed once. No name, no number. Just a message. Raven's Hollow wasn't the last. Grid 34, 7 degrees north, 111, 2 degrees west. They're coming again, and this time they know about you. Ava stared at the glowing screen. Her reflection in the glass looked calm, focused, ready. She reached for her notebook. The last page fluttered open. A new map was already half drawn, red ink spreading like veins across clean paper. She whispered page 2. The desert wind carried her words away, flipping the notebook's corner like a promise. The story wasn't finished. It was only changing shape. Because sometimes, the war doesn't end when the shooting stops. Sometimes, it begins the moment someone finally listens. What if the war you survived was only a rehearsal for the one that's coming? The desert outside the Fort Valor training compound glowed under the late evening sun. Everything shimmered: air, sand, horizon, the world caught between fire and silence. Ava Marlowe stood by the window, motionless, staring out toward the gold-brown distance. The phone on her desk still glowed faintly beside the battered notebook. The message was simple. No introduction, no name. Just coordinates. And a warning. Grid 34, 7 degrees north, 111, 2 degrees west. They're coming again, and this time they know about you. Her thumb hovered above the screen. She could delete it, pretend it was nothing. A glitch, a cruel joke, but her gut said otherwise. That same quiet instinct that once told her about Raven's Hollow. The one that had saved her life. The one that had been right when everyone else had been wrong. She shut the phone off. And yet for hours she couldn't stop hearing it in her mind, that voice without a voice, whispering between frequencies. They know about you. That night the base lights dimmed early. The halls of Fort Valor were quiet except for the hum of ventilation fans and the soft click of distant footsteps. Ava sat alone in the simulation room, the same one used for cadet exercises. The walls projected holographic terrains. But she wasn't testing cadets tonight. She was testing herself. The projections shifted at her command. Ridges, valleys, heat maps. The coordinates from the message materialized on screen. Desert plateaus, canyons, an abandoned communication station near the Arizona border. Ava zoomed in. The location wasn't random. It was a mirrored topography eerily similar to Black Ridge. Same shape of approach lines, same funneling paths, same silence around the perimeter. Her chest tightened. Someone had built a trap. And this time, it looked like her kind of trap. She turned off the hologram, grabbed her notebook and began sketching by hand again. Not battle formations, not enemy counts. Emotion. She drew circles where tension would rise, dotted lines where doubt would fracture, curves where courage would collapse. And when she was done, she saw something terrifying in her own handwriting. The patterns didn't belong to the enemy. They belonged to her. She was the variable. She was the one they were predicting now. The next morning before sunrise, Ava walked across the quiet tarmac. Her shadow stretched long behind her. She wore no rank patch, no visible name tag, just a plain desert fatigue and a folded letter in her pocket. She stopped in front of the hangar marked Section Echo. Most people at Fort Valor didn't even know it existed. A sentry at the door scanned her ID, then frowned. "You're not cleared for." A voice from inside interrupted. "She is, let her in." The guard hesitated, then stepped aside. The metal door slid open with a hiss. Inside, the air was colder. Dim lights glowed above steel floors. Rows of terminals blinked with encrypted maps. A handful of people worked in silence, analysts, technicians, and soldiers who didn't wear insignia. A woman stood near the far wall, arms crossed, sharp posture, hair tied back, civilian clothes but the stance of someone who'd lived through more than a few firefights. "Specialist Marlowe," she said, "or should I say crybaby?" Ava's brow furrowed, but her tone stayed even. "Depends who's asking." The woman smiled slightly. "Call me Beckett, I'm with Division 13, Psychological Warfare Analysis. We've been watching you." Ava's gaze narrowed. "That's comforting." Beckett didn't flinch. She picked up a tablet and tossed it gently onto the table between them. The screen lit up with a heat map, the same coordinates from the message. "2 nights ago," Beckett said, "a recon drone went dark over this area. We recovered partial data. You recognize the layout, don't you?" Ava nodded slowly. "Raven, Hollow, almost identical." "Almost," Beckett agreed. "But this time there's no army, no uniformed enemy, just silence. That's why you're here. Someone built this for you. We want to know who." Ava's eyes dropped to the screen. "I already have a guess." Beckett watched her for a long moment. "We read your file, the empathy grid, the deception loops, turning psychology into defense tactics. You changed doctrine without firing a shot. But tell me, Marlowe," she leaned closer, "when you look at that map, do you feel fear?" Ava looked up, her voice quiet. "Only when people stop listening." Beckett smiled faintly. "Good, then you're going to fit in perfectly." For the next several weeks, Ava disappeared from the world. Officially, she was on recovery leave. Unofficially, she was training under Division 13, a covert task unit built around one principle: anticipate the human mind before it moves. It wasn't standard warfare. It was empathy turned into strategy. Where others saw targets, they saw patterns. Where others used weapons, they used understanding. Ava called it seeing the pulse before the heartbeat. Her new team was small, 6 operatives, each chosen for how they felt more than how they fought. Sergeant Cho, a linguist who could read deception through syntax. Corporal de Leon, a sniper who claimed he could tell if someone was lying just by their breathing rhythm. And then there was Beckett, the strategist, the mind who stitched them all together. They didn't salute each other. They didn't use rank. They used trust. Ava thrived in the silence of it, in the precision, in the purpose that didn't need medals to validate it. One night during a briefing, Beckett placed a dossier on the table. "New intel came in," she said. "3 different listening posts have picked up encrypted transmissions, identical structure to the ones that lured Black Ridge into the trap." Ava's jaw tightened. "They're repeating it." "Worse," Beckett replied. "They're imitating your old communication pattern. The enemy is using your voice, your tactics, even your decoy sequences. They're learning empathy." A cold chill rippled through the room. Ava spoke first. "Then we're not fighting soldiers, we're fighting mirrors." Beckett nodded. "Exactly. They're building what we're calling echo units. Synthetic teams trained to anticipate emotional reaction, modeled after you." For a moment, Ava didn't breathe. The room seemed smaller, the air heavier. "Modeled after me?" she asked. "How?" Beckett turned the screen around. Intercepted audio from the Arizona sector. The playback began. A familiar voice echoed through the speakers. Low calm commanding. Her voice, Alpha flank secure, Bravo advancing, Sniper 2 hold position. Ava froze. That was her recording from Black Ridge. The same inflection, the same pauses. Someone had taken her deception loops and perfected them. She whispered, "They're not just coming for me, they're using me." Beckett's eyes softened, but her tone stayed firm. "Then we use them first." For the next mission, Ava was back where she belonged, on the ground. Desert dusk. The same sound of wind scraping over rock, the same silence that carried warning. Her team moved in low formation through the canyon. No radio chatter, just hand signals and breath. They reached the abandoned relay station at 200 hours. It looked like a skeleton of metal and memory, towers half collapsed, sand swallowing the concrete floor. But Ava felt it instantly, that same hum beneath the silence. A presence. Cho whispered, "You feel that?" Ava nodded, "They're watching." De Leon adjusted his scope, "Thermals." Ava shook her head. "Not yet, they're not machines. They're people trained to think like fear itself. They'll wait for us to blink first." Beckett's voice crackled softly in her earpiece. "Marlowe, talk to me." Ava crouched, tracing a finger across the dirt. Small patterns, boot prints in irregular rhythm. Two pairs, circling, mirroring. "They're using mimic roots," Ava murmured. "They're reflecting our own formation back at us." Beckett's voice, meaning. Ava's whisper was dry as dust. "They're playing empathy chess." She stood, motioning for her team to halt. The air shifted, faint, electric. Then a whisper through her comms, faint, distorted, her own voice again. "Hold the line." The same cadence, the same modulation. Cho looked at her, eyes wide. "That's you." Ava raised her weapon, scanning the ridge. Her pulse didn't spike. Her breath didn't quicken. She had trained for this. "Not anymore," she said quietly. The first shot came from nowhere, a clean crack that tore through the dust near her boot. De Leon fired back instantly. Echoes rippled across the valley, each shot answered by another, as if the canyon itself had come alive. Ava ducked behind a rusted generator, eyes closed, listening. Not for bullets, for rhythm. Every group had a rhythm. Even imitation had a heartbeat. And then she heard it, half a second delay between volleys. Synthetic emotion trying to imitate real fear. Now she yelled. Her team shifted positions, splitting wide, silent as ghosts. The next exchange of gunfire shattered the illusion, smoke revealing figures in mismatched gear, their helmets blinking faint blue lights. Human silhouettes augmented with predictive modules. Not soldiers. Not machines. Copies. De Leon muttered, "Jesus, they made empathy soldiers." Ava stared through her scope at one of them. The movement, the posture, even the tilt of the rifle, all identical to her own stance. She fired once. The reflection dropped. She whispered to herself, "You can copy patterns, but you can't fake purpose." The firefight raged for another hour. Dust turned red. Every sound felt slower, heavier. But for Ava, it was something else entirely. Not fear, not rage, but recognition. She wasn't fighting enemies. She was fighting what people became when they stopped feeling. She was fighting the version of herself she might have become, efficient, emotionless, empty. By the time the last echo unit fell, the dawn had started to break. Light touched the canyon walls, turning the dusk gold again. Cho approached, panting. "That's all of them, sector clear." Ava nodded slowly, lowering her rifle. "No," she said, "not all." Beckett's voice returned in her ear. "What do you mean?" Ava's eyes traced the horizon, something out there, faint and deliberate, moving away. A vehicle, small, fast, leaving the scene before they arrived. "They sent decoys," she murmured. "The real ones are watching, learning." She looked down at the cracked ground beneath her boots. The same pattern she'd seen before, every ambush, every mistake ignored. The sound of wind rose, like a memory returning. She exhaled. "This isn't the next battle," she said softly. "It's the rehearsal for the last one." And as the sun climbed over the horizon, she stood there, rifle slung low, notebook open in her hand, sketching new lines on a blank page. For the first time, she wasn't drawing fear or pain or loss. She was drawing understanding. Because empathy wasn't a weakness. It was evolution. And she had just met what came after. How do you fight something that already knows what you'll feel before you do? The wind at dawn was colder than it should have been. Ava Marlowe stood on the canyon ridge, staring down at the battlefield below. Smoke still drifted between the rocks. The air shimmered faintly with the heat of spent rounds. The silence that followed wasn't peace, it was recoil. She didn't move for a long time, just listened. The wind carried the echoes of everything that had happened, the shots, the orders, even her own voice rebounding faintly off the stone walls. But this time, the voice didn't sound like hers. It sounded like a stranger wearing her skin. De Leon approached slowly, his rifle slung. "You good, Captain?" Ava didn't look back. "Don't call me that, not here." He hesitated, nodded once, then turned away. There were no ranks in Division 13, but everyone still looked to her the way soldiers look to someone who's already died once and come back different. When the last of the echo units had fallen, Beckett's voice had gone quiet on the comms. Not static, not malfunction, just silence. That was 3 hours ago. And silence, Ava had learned, always meant something. Back at the forward station, the remaining members of the team regrouped. The old relay bunker buzzed faintly with power from their portable generators. The walls were covered with scribbled notes, thermal maps, and fragments of intercepted code. Ava sat at the table, rubbing a line of dust between her fingers while Cho patched a wound on his shoulder. "They weren't just copying us," Cho said quietly. "They were anticipating us. Every position we moved to they'd already mapped, like they knew what fear would make us do next." Ava nodded. "They didn't predict us, they remembered us." De Leon frowned, meaning. "They were trained on real people," she said. "Us, our past reports, mission feeds, everything we ever logged. They used our own data, our emotional patterns to build them." She turned the notebook toward them, tapping a page she'd been sketching since the firefight. The familiar loops of her empathy grid filled the paper, but now new lines branched off from the originals, parallel, inverted like reflections in broken glass. "The original grid was mine," she said. "But this one, it's theirs. It mirrors me, but not perfectly, like they tried to copy empathy without understanding it." Cho muttered, "A machine learning to feel." Ava shook her head slowly. "No, a human trying to unlearn it." That night she couldn't sleep. She sat outside the bunker, wrapped in a dusty thermal blanket, notebook open on her knees. The stars were dim, their light smothered by drifting smoke. Each time she blinked, she saw faces, the echo soldiers, those empty eyes behind helmets. Human but hollow, flesh trained to imitate feeling. Beckett's voice echoed in her memory from their earlier briefings. "Empathy is a weapon, Ava, and like any weapon, someone was bound to steal it." But what she hadn't said, what Ava now realized, was that empathy also leaves fingerprints. And whoever had built those echo units had learned from someone inside. She picked up her satellite radio and tuned it to Beckett's secure frequency. Static, then nothing. She tried again. "Echo lead to command." Pause. "Echo lead to command, come in." Nothing. Finally, faintly, a voice broke through. "Marlowe, that you?" Her pulse jumped. "Beckett, where are you?" The reply came in fragments, distorted by distance. "Intercepted, division compromised, don't trust." Then silence again. Ava stared at the radio, her mind replaying the last clear phrase, "Don't trust." She closed the notebook, tightened her vest strap and stood. Whatever was happening, it wasn't over. It was spreading. 48 hours later, Division 13 reconvened at an undisclosed facility buried beneath the Nevada desert. The air smelled like ozone and oil. Computer servers hummed in long rows, casting faint blue light across polished concrete. Beckett was waiting. Her arm was bandaged, eyes red, sleepless, but alive. "Glad you made it," she said, her voice rough. "You were right. The Arizona strike was bait. They wanted to see how far we'd follow the pattern." Ava stepped closer. "Who's they?" Beckett hesitated. "We're not sure, but we've traced the transmissions to multiple global origins: Berlin, Jakarta, Anchorage, even Geneva. All different military research networks. Someone's building echo infrastructure everywhere." Cho exhaled, shaking his head. "So it's not a faction, it's everyone." "Not everyone," Beckett corrected. "Just anyone who stopped believing empathy belongs on the battlefield." Ava's gaze hardened. "They're trying to erase the human element." Beckett handed her a folder. Inside were stills and surveillance captures, tactical overlays, blurred faces. One stood out. A man in civilian clothes standing beside a field test station, expression calm, hands folded. Ava's throat tightened. She knew that face. "Dr. Cal Reinur," she whispered. "Cognitive Systems Command. He worked Black Ridge's communications interface." Beckett nodded grimly. "He vanished 3 weeks after the incident. We think he's the architect behind Echo development. They call it Project Nader. Their goal isn't domination, it's replacement." Ava flipped the photo over. On the back, someone had written a phrase in pen. "Emotion is interference." Her pulse quickened. That phrase, O'Connor used to mock it during training. He'd say, "If emotion's interference, I'll take static over silence any day." Now, the words felt like a prophecy inverted. Later that night, Ava stood before the facility's observation deck, a reinforced glass wall overlooking a simulation chamber below. Inside, a dozen figures stood in formation. Echo units. Captured, deactivated. Still human, still breathing, but empty. Technicians moved between them like surgeons, monitoring vitals and responses. One of the Echo soldiers blinked when Ava stepped closer to the glass, as if recognizing her. Ava whispered to herself, "What did they do to you?" Beckett joined her, holding a tablet that displayed neural scan patterns. "They're not mind-controlled," she said. "They volunteered, or thought they did. Their empathy networks were systematically shut down through conditioning. They feel nothing now, they just react." Ava's jaw clenched. "They think that's strength." Beckett turned to her. "The world's been bleeding empathy for decades. All it needed was a system that called it efficiency." They stood there for a long time, watching the motionless soldiers below. And in that stillness, Ava made a quiet promise to herself, a promise she didn't yet know how to keep. She would find Reinur, and she would prove that empathy wasn't interference. It was the last human firewall left. Weeks later, under orders from Division 13, Ava and her team were deployed again. This time overseas, Central Europe, outskirts of Berlin. Official cover: NATO Psychological Warfare Exchange. Unofficial mission: track Reinur. Berlin was cold that season. Rain slicked the rooftops, turning the city into a mirror of lights and glass. Ava walked through it wearing a plain black coat, earpiece in, hair tucked beneath a cap. De Leon shadowed her from a parallel street. Cho handled the network intercepts from a cafe across the square. At precisely 1900 hours, her comms clicked alive. "Target moving," Cho said. "Gray sedan eastbound approaching Brandenburg perimeter." Ava adjusted her pace, eyes sweeping traffic. Then there he was. Reinur, the same man from the photo. Older now, colder. He stepped out of the car, entered an underground corridor beneath an old museum. 2 guards followed. Ava whispered, "Got him." Beckett's voice, "Do not engage, just confirm location." But Ava didn't answer. Something was wrong. As she moved closer, her pulse synced with the faint hum under the street, a vibration she hadn't felt since Raven's Hollow. A trap. She turned sharply, hand reaching for her sidearm, but it was already too late. From the far end of the corridor, a voice spoke through hidden speakers. Calm, familiar. Still mapping emotion before movement. "Aren't you, Ava?" Her heart froze, that voice. It was Rhiannon. It was hers. "Welcome back to the grid," the voice said. "We've been waiting." The lights flickered, and the world went black. When she woke, she was sitting in a metal chair, wrists bound loosely with magnetic cuffs. The room was sterile, humming with machines. One wall was transparent, revealing another room beyond, filled with glowing empathy grids like hers, displayed on massive digital screens. And standing in front of them, silhouetted against the light, was Dr. Cal Rhiannon. He turned slowly when he saw she was awake. "You taught us more than you realize," he said gently. "Your empathy grid was revolutionary but limited. You used emotion to predict fear. We used it to eliminate it." Ava's voice was hoarse. "You turned empathy into a weapon." Rhiannon smiled faintly. "No, you did. We perfected it." She pulled against the cuffs. "Why me?" "Because you're proof," he said. "That empathy can win battles, and if it can win, it can be replicated." He gestured toward the digital wall. The empathy maps flickered, hundreds of patterns, movements, voices. Each one a person. Each one learning how not to feel. "This," he said, "is humanity's next evolution. No hesitation, no pain, no grief, just pure response." Ava stared at him, and for the first time she didn't feel anger. She felt sorrow. "You've mistaken numbness for strength," she said softly, "and fear for control." Rhiannon's expression hardened. "You'll understand soon enough." He turned away, typing a command on the terminal. The lights dimmed, and the monitors behind him lit up with one central name: Ava Marlowe, Source Pattern Reinitialization. Her stomach sank. They weren't just studying her empathy. They were about to erase it. What happens when the enemy doesn't want to kill you, only to make you stop feeling? The lights in the chamber pulsed like a heartbeat that wasn't hers. White, then blue, then dark again. Each flicker painted her face in fragments: soldier, survivor, experiment. Ava Marlowe sat restrained in the metal chair, pulse racing against the soft hum of machinery. The cuffs at her wrists weren't heavy, but they hummed faintly with static energy, like they were listening. Every breath she took, every flicker of thought was being recorded. Across the glass wall, Dr. Cal Rhiannon stood calmly, clipboard in hand, surrounded by assistants who never spoke. His lab coat was spotless. His eyes were not. "You've seen war from both sides," he began, his tone almost kind. "You've lived through it and shaped it. You've proven that empathy can predict violence with higher accuracy than satellite intelligence. But what you never understood, Ava, is that empathy and fear are the same circuit." She glared at him. "Fear keeps people alive." He smiled faintly. "For a time, until it makes them hesitate, until it makes them question." He nodded toward a terminal, and one of the assistants entered a code. A soft chime. The cuffs tightened slightly, not enough to hurt, but enough to remind her that control was no longer hers. On the glass screen in front of her, lines appeared. Her empathy grid, the one she'd drawn years ago in red ink, but now digitized, pulsing, animated. Every spike and curve translated into data points. Rhiannon's voice softened. "You called this an empathy map, but what you really built was a pattern of vulnerability. You taught the world how to weaponize understanding." Ava's jaw clenched. "You turned it into programming." "We evolved it," Rhiannon said. You don't win wars by understanding pain, you end them by removing it. He gestured again. The screen changed, and Ava froze. Across dozens of panels, she saw faces, soldiers, civilians, officers, all linked by glowing red threads. Real-time biometric data, heart rates, neural activity. The system pulsed with human rhythm. Rionur looked at her through the glass. Welcome to Project Nader, a global empathy extraction grid. Each node once felt something, now they don't. Ava whispered, you're rewriting human instinct. Rionur's eyes gleamed. Correction, I'm freeing it. Time blurred. She didn't know how long she'd been there. Hours, maybe days. They fed her, they kept her hydrated, but they never stopped the monitoring. She began to realize that the room wasn't just watching her. It was learning her. Every heartbeat she tried to steady, the lights shifted. Every time she closed her eyes, the screens pulsed brighter. It wasn't torture in the traditional sense. It was dismantling. Bit by bit. Layer by layer. A quiet erosion of self. But Rionur underestimated one thing. Empathy wasn't just a feeling. It was memory. And memory was the one thing he couldn't sterilize. On the second night, or maybe the 10th, the hum of the machines blended with whispers that weren't real. At first, she thought it was feedback from the speakers. Then she recognized the voice. You win the fight before it begins, if you listen long enough. O'Connor, her old sergeant, dead. The words echoed through her like a heartbeat she'd forgotten. Another voice joined his, soft, familiar. Because I cried when soldiers died. Her own. Ava's breathing grew shallow. She wasn't hallucinating. She was remembering. The machine's pulse synced with her own rhythm, trying to rewrite her, but her memories fought back. Each recollection burned like static, fracturing the calm Rionur wanted to impose. She whispered into the dark, you can't erase something that listens back. By what she guessed was day 3, the assistant stopped appearing. Only Rionur remained. He dismissed the others, preferring silence as he watched her. You're resisting, he said, sounding almost intrigued. Do you know how rare that is? I've been underestimated before, she rasped. He smiled. That's what all subjects say before compliance. Ava laughed weakly. Subjects stop being people, I don't. Rionur stepped closer to the glass. For the first time, she saw something flicker behind his composure, irritation, maybe even doubt. You still believe empathy can win, he said. But empathy can't scale. It fails under pressure. That's why humanity repeats its mistakes, because it feels instead of learning. Ava stared at him steadily. Maybe mistakes are how we learn. Or how we die, he shot back. Silence. The hum filled the space between them. Finally, she said softly, you talk about evolution like it's escape, but what you're building isn't humanity without pain. It's obedience without conscience. Rionur didn't answer. He simply keyed a sequence into the console, and the lights above her dimmed. I think, he said, it's time you see what evolution feels like. Her chair vibrated softly. The cuffs loosened, then pulsed with electric warmth. A faint hum rose in her ears. The grid on the glass began to rotate, each line glowing brighter. A voice, synthetic, genderless, filled the room. Neural calibration commencing. Subject, Marlowe Ava, synchronizing empathy pattern. Her heartbeat accelerated. The light stung her eyes. She realized what they were doing. They weren't extracting her data. They were mapping her consciousness into the system. Her thoughts, her instincts, turned into code. She gritted her teeth, fought against the pressure building in her skull. Every memory flickered, the range, the bass, the smell of cordite and desert air. O'Connor's hand steadying hers. Ray's voice bleeding through static. The word crybaby, once an insult, now a medal. She clung to those fragments like lifelines. The light grew harsher, piercing into her mind. Pain flooded through her, but beneath the pain something stranger stirred. The system was syncing with her empathy, and that meant it was feeling everything she did. Her fear, her anger, her sorrow, her hope. Ava's lips curved into a faint, defiant smile. "Then feel this," she whispered. She closed her eyes, not to surrender, but to remember. The grid pulsed violently. The screens flickered, alarms sounded. Rhaenyr's calm shattered. "What are you doing?" he demanded. Ava's voice was steady now, cold and burning all at once. "You built your system on the assumption that empathy is predictable. It's not. It's chaos wrapped in care. It breaks patterns." Her heart thundered. The machine's rhythm faltered, trying to match it, failing. Rhaenyr shouted, "Cut power." But it was too late. A surge ripped through the interface, lights exploding in white arcs. The glass fractured with a deafening crack. Sparks rained down. And for the first time since she'd been captured, Ava moved. When she woke again, the cuffs were broken. The room was in ruin. Smoke drifted from shattered panels. She staggered to her feet, dizzy, bleeding from her temple. The transparent wall was gone. So was Rhaenyr. The only sound was the dying hum of the machine, still cycling through fragments of her voice. "Alpha flank secure. Hold the line." "It's all right, sir, as long as you're listening now." Ava picked up a shard of glass, used it to cut the remnants of the restraint strap around her wrist. Then she turned toward the corridor. Her legs trembled, but her steps were steady. She followed the dim emergency lights down a stairwell that opened into a data vault, rows of glowing cores flickering with millions of data streams, each one labeled with a name. Human names. Ava stepped closer, brushing her fingers over the nearest capsule. A young woman's face flickered across the projection, eyes closed, peaceful, unfeeling. Project Nader wasn't just building soldiers. It was archiving people. Her stomach twisted. She looked down the long hall of glowing blue light, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, stretching into darkness. Then she saw one name that made her blood run cold. O'Connor Miles. Her knees almost gave way. He'd been dead for years. Or so she thought. The display pulsed faintly, neural pattern preserved, synaptic copy active. Rhaenyr hadn't lied. He'd removed emotion and kept what was left. Ava whispered, voice shaking, "You stole their ghosts." She stood there for a moment, surrounded by the hum of stolen humanity. Then her grip tightened on the shard of glass. "Not anymore." She moved down the corridor, pulling open panels, ripping out connectors. The alarms wailed again, red lights flooding the vault. When she reached the control hub, she saw the central node glowing white, feeding every capsule. Without hesitation, she smashed the interface, sending sparks flying. The lights across the vault flickered, dimmed, and one by one, the capsules went dark. The hum of the machines faded to silence. And for the first time, Ava could hear her own heartbeat again. Behind her, a voice echoed through the intercom, calm, deliberate, broken by static. "You think you've stopped it," Rhaenyr's voice. "You've only delayed it. Empathy can't save what evolution demands." Ava turned toward the speaker, breathing hard. "Maybe not, but it reminds us why we evolve at all." Then she walked out. Above ground, dawn was breaking. The air outside was cold, sharp, clean, unfiltered. She stumbled into the light, blinking against the rising sun. Every step hurt, every breath burned, but she was alive. Behind her, the facility burned quietly beneath the sand, no explosion, just slow fire consuming silence. She stood there a long time, watching the smoke rise like ghosts released. In the distance, faintly, a helicopter approached. Division 13 colors. Beckett's voice crackled through the radio, full of disbelief. "Marlowe, are you still?" Ava smiled faintly. "Still me," she said softly, "for now." Beckett's breath caught. We thought God, Ava, what happened down there? Ava looked back at the burning horizon. They tried to turn empathy into code, she said, so I gave it a soul. The line went quiet for a long moment. Then Beckett said, barely above a whisper, come home. Ava exhaled. Home gone, she said, but maybe I can build a new one. She closed her eyes, feeling the wind lift the dust around her. It felt alive again. Unpredictable. Human. Because sometimes, the only way to save what's human is to remind it how to feel pain and keep going anyway. What happens when you become the story they tell, but not the one they understand? The helicopter touched down on the tarmac outside Division 13's Nevada compound at dawn. The blades slowed, scattering dust across the desert runway. The world smelled of burnt ozone and sand. When the rear hatch opened, the air inside was still, heavy with the sound of a heartbeat that didn't know if it was relieved or afraid. Ava Marlowe stepped out slowly, wrapped in a gray thermal cloak, her hair tied back, face pale but calm. The horizon behind her burned orange, light bleeding over the mountains like a slow revelation. For the first time in weeks, she was back under open sky. Beckett waited at the edge of the landing pad, her expression unreadable. She didn't salute, neither did Ava. They just stood there, two women who'd seen too much, both pretending they hadn't. Finally Beckett spoke, voice low and brittle. We thought we lost you. Ava gave a faint smile. You almost did. Reinur. Gone, she said, but not finished. Beckett's eyes flicked toward the distant horizon where the helicopter disappeared into sunlight. You took out the core. I did, Ava said, but the data isn't gone. They had backups off-site encrypted. Nader isn't dead, just blind for now. Beckett's jaw tightened. We'll hunt the rest. Ava nodded, but her gaze drifted to the wind-blown desert. She looked tired, not just physically, the kind of tired that sits behind the eyes and never leaves. Beckett studied her quietly. You don't believe it's over. Ava's voice was barely above a whisper. Because empathy doesn't end when you destroy a machine. It ends when people stop using it. Inside Division 13's command building, the air hummed with whispers. Analysts paused mid-sentence when she walked by. Soldiers stopped what they were doing. Eyes followed her, some with respect, some with fear, others with the distant awe reserved for things that shouldn't exist but do. She could feel it, the mythology taking shape. The woman who fought 92 alone. The soldier who burned emotion into code. The ghost who made machines feel fear. Every story wanted a symbol. But Ava Marlowe was still just a woman trying to breathe. When she entered the debriefing room, Beckett closed the door behind them. Command going to want to report, she said. Every detail, but first there's something you should see. She turned on the projector. A world map glowed to life, pulsing with dozens of red dots. These are Nader signatures, Beckett explained. They've started surfacing across multiple continents. Whoever Reinur was working for, it wasn't just one government, it's everyone. Ava's brows furrowed. Replication. Replication, Beckett confirmed. Every major defense bloc is trying to rebuild their own empathy grids now. You cracked the code for survival, Ava, and the world heard it as an instruction manual. The room fell silent. Ava whispered, so I saved humanity by teaching it how to erase itself faster. Beckett shook her head. No, you gave us time. What they do with it, that's on them. But Ava wasn't listening anymore. She stared at the map, the blinking lights spreading like infection across oceans and borders. The grid wasn't a technology anymore. It was an idea. And ideas, once released, don't die, they mutate. In the weeks that followed, news leaked. Whistleblowers, satellite images. The footage from Black Ridge resurfaced, grainy but clear. A lone woman fighting impossible odds, voice calm over chaos. They called her the listener. It went viral: speeches, documentaries, analysis. Politicians quoted her lines. A cold mind pulls the trigger. A burning heart wins the right fight. Recruitment posters carried her silhouette. And across social feeds, her face became an icon of human resilience stripped of context, simplified into inspiration. Ava watched it all unfold from a distance. The world didn't know what it was glorifying. They saw strength, not the cost. She couldn't stand the interviews, the briefings, the panels debating whether empathy could be standardized. Every time someone said her name, she felt further from herself. One evening, Beckett found her sitting alone on the observation deck, boots up on the railing, staring at the desert. "You're all over the news," Beckett said, leaning on the railing beside her. "Congress wants a closed hearing. NATO's asking for consultation. You're famous." Ava's tone was dry. Fame, just misunderstanding on repeat. Beckett gave a small smile. "They're calling you the last true soldier." Ava shook her head slowly. "No, I'm just the first mistake they learned to market." Beckett turned to look at her fully. "Then what do we do?" Ava was quiet for a long time. The wind tugged at her hair. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled. Finally, she said, "We listen again before it starts over." 2 nights later, Beckett woke to an alarm. Unauthorized data access. Level 3 clearance breach. She ran through the darkened corridor toward the control room. A technician spun in his chair, wide-eyed. "It's her," he said. "Marlowe's pulling files." Beckett stopped cold. "What files?" The tech turned the monitor, a cascade of encrypted data spilling across the screen. Names, locations, coordinates. Division 13 archives. Ava was copying everything. They found her in the operations bay, standing in front of a console as screens around her glowed blue. She didn't turn when Beckett entered. "You can't stop them," Ava said quietly, "but you can warn the ones who don't know they're part of it." Beckett's voice was sharp. "You're leaking classified intel. I'm giving it back to the people that used to build it." Beckett stepped closer. "You'll be hunted, you know that." Ava's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "I was hunted the moment I listened." She ejected a small drive, pocketed it, and turned to face her. The fatigue was gone from her eyes. What replaced it was something steadier: clarity. Beckett exhaled. "Where will you go?" Ava looked toward the door. Everywhere they built silence. Before dawn, she was gone. No alarms, no chase. Just a signature erased from the system. By the time Division 13 traced her departure, she was already 3 countries away, moving through airports and border towns under false names, carrying nothing but a small rucksack and the notebook she'd filled half her life ago. And the drive. She left no digital trail, only patterns, the kind of ghost codes that would later appear in news reports as anomalous data pings. Some said she was hunting Rhaenyra's successors. Some said she was dismantling the grids one by one. Others claimed she'd vanished into the wilderness to live in silence, writing coordinates on stones like scripture. But the truth, the one Beckett suspected, was simpler. Ava Marlowe had become what the world refused to understand. A reminder. Months later, in a small mountain village along the Turkish border, a boy stumbled across a weathered notebook buried near a radio tower. Inside, hand-drawn maps, cryptic circles, words written in red and black ink. Empathy is not intelligence. Empathy is endurance. If you hear silence, it means someone stopped listening. On the last page, a single line. Page 3 begins wherever someone still feels enough to care. No name. No rank. No coordinates. Just that. Back in Nevada, Beckett sat alone in her office, the desert night pressing against the glass. On her desk, an envelope with no return address. Inside a single flash drive. Unmarked. She plugged it in. A single file appeared, audio only. Ava's voice. If this reaches you, Beckett, it means I'm not dead. Not yet. You told me once empathy can't scale. You were right, it's not meant to. It's supposed to stay small, human-sized. It's supposed to hurt, because if it doesn't, it's not real. You can't automate the soul. You can only remember it before it forgets itself. Keep listening, the pattern's changing again. Then silence. Beckett sat back, eyes glistening. She looked at the map on her wall, the same world glowing with red lights. Only now, a few of them had gone dark. 3 months later, in Berlin, a classified report reached the desk of a senior defense minister. Titled, Incident 47B, Emotional Interference Within Nader Echo Framework. The report claimed entire units had begun malfunctioning. Hesitation where there should be obedience. Mercy where there should be orders. Fear where there should be none. At the bottom of the report was an untraceable tag, 4 words written in clean, simple text. You taught them to feel. Ava Marlowe had vanished. But somewhere between the silences she left behind, something had changed. Not just machines. People. Because empathy, once sparked, doesn't stay contained. It spreads like light in the dark, quiet, stubborn, unstoppable. And the world, for the first time in years, began to hesitate again. To think, to feel. That hesitation would save it. Or destroy it. But Ava had already made her peace. She'd never see the results of what she started, and she didn't need to. Because somewhere out there, someone new was listening. And that was enough. Sometimes the loudest battles aren't fought with bullets, but with silence. And the courage to still feel something when the world tells you not to. How long does an echo last after the voice that made it is gone? Years passed. The wars changed shape. The enemies changed names. The world kept inventing new reasons to stop listening. And still, somewhere in the shadows of servers and satellites, her voice survived. Ava Marlowe. No longer a soldier. No longer even a person in official records. Just a name whispered by those who'd learned to feel before they were told to act. The world after Project Nader was quieter, colder, but it wasn't dead. Governments had banned the use of empathic modeling in warfare, at least publicly. Behind closed doors, the research continued. It always did. But something unexpected had happened. In the cracks between systems, new patterns began to appear: soldiers who hesitated, drones that refused lethal commands, officers who withdrew from unnecessary strikes. The machines were failing, they said. But those who looked closer knew the truth. They weren't failing. They were remembering. Someone had rewritten the silence. It began with a young cadet named Lyra Kale. 19 years old. Top of her class at Fort Valor Academy, the same hall where Ava once stood years before. Lyra had grown up on the recordings, the myth of the listener. She could quote the line by heart: a cold mind pulls the trigger, a burning heart wins the right fight. To her, Ava wasn't a ghost, she was scripture. But that day, as Lyra stood at the firing range, she didn't feel like a disciple. Her rifle trembled slightly in her hands. The target downrange blurred through tears she couldn't explain. Her instructor barked, "Kale, what's wrong?" "Sir, she hesitated, searching for words. "I felt something." "Feeling doesn't win wars," the instructor snapped. Lyra lowered the rifle. "Then maybe we're fighting the wrong ones." The silence that followed was almost a rebellion. That night she was pulled from training. Confined to quarters. Her file flagged for emotional interference. But before the system locked her out, she received an anonymous message on her data terminal. No header. No sender. Just one line of text. If you hear silence, it means someone stopped listening. Lyra froze. It was the quote from the notebook, the one they'd buried under a mountain of classified archives. The one no one was supposed to know existed. She whispered the name under her breath. Ave. Across the globe, similar whispers surfaced. An engineer in Singapore designed an AI drone that refused kill orders without a moral re-verification step. A comms officer in South America shut down an entire strike sequence after hearing a false command in a familiar voice. A refugee medic in Warsaw said she dreamed of a woman drawing circles in red ink, whispering coordinates that led her to a wounded child. Different continents, different languages, same pattern. Everywhere empathy had been erased, something was rewriting it. They called it the Marlowe effect. No one could explain it. No single source. But every case began with a familiar glitch, a faint female voice bleeding through static, saying one word. Listen. Back at Division 13, Beckett was still alive. Older now, slower. Her hair silvered by years of war that no longer used uniforms. She retired from active duty, but she couldn't stop watching. Every few months she'd receive encrypted packets, no metadata, no traceable origin. Just audio fragments, coordinates, sometimes a single phrase. She'd play them late at night in her quiet apartment overlooking the desert. Her eyes would close, and she'd let the voice wash through her. They think empathy is weakness. It's the only strength that outlives us. When they silence feeling, find the noise beneath it. This isn't faith, it's memory that refuses to die. Each message ended the same way. AM. She didn't know if it was really Ava. Maybe it was someone who wanted the legend to stay alive. But deep down, she suspected Ava had found her own kind of immortality, not in flesh, but in conscience. One evening, Beckett stood at the edge of a memorial wall on the Fort Valor campus. Names etched in glass. Ava Marlowe among them. The sun had begun to set, painting the reflection across the polished surface in hues of gold and violet. Beckett traced the name with her fingertips. You'd hate this, she said softly. You never wanted monuments. Her voice cracked slightly. You just wanted people to listen. A breeze swept through the open courtyard, rustling the flags overhead. And for a moment, she thought she heard a whisper riding the wind. Still do. Beckett smiled faintly, tears catching in the last of the light. Yeah, she said, I figured. The next day, an encrypted message arrived at Division 13's dormant servers. No sender. No location. Just coordinates deep in the Peruvian highlands. And an attached file labeled Empathy Grid Page 3. Beckett watched from afar as the few remaining analysts booted up the sequence. At first, it looked like random interference. Then, as the data compiled, patterns emerged: concentric rings, pulse waves, shifting lights. But this time, it wasn't fear or pain or anticipation. It was connection. Every pulse linked to another: people, machines, frequencies. Not mapping weakness. Mapping understanding. The empathy grid had evolved. It wasn't predicting war anymore. It was teaching harmony. Beckett exhaled, whispering, "You finished it." Days later, satellite imagery confirmed something extraordinary near the coordinates. In the middle of an abandoned mountain communications array, new energy signatures had appeared, soft, rhythmic, almost musical. No heat trails. No military presence. Just resonance. When analysts ran the data through sound filters, it formed a pattern of tones. Low, steady. Like a heartbeat. The final layer of decoding revealed words embedded in frequency intervals. I am not gone. I am the hesitation between cause and consequence. I am the second thought before the order. I am the silence that saves. Don't look for me. Just listen. That message went viral within hours of its leak. Governments tried to suppress it. But you can't delete sound once people start humming it. Within weeks, the phrase "just listen" began appearing on protest signs, murals, military checkpoints. Students spray-painted it on academy walls. Pilots carved it into fuselage panels. And soldiers began using it as a call sign before non-lethal operations. The phrase didn't start a revolution. It started something quieter, a recalibration. For the first time in years, the world hesitated. And in that hesitation, it remembered itself. Months later, Beckett traveled to those Peruvian coordinates herself. It took 3 helicopters and 2 days of climbing. When she reached the ridge, she found the old array, silent, untouched except for a single item hanging from one of the rusted antenna beams. A small notebook. The cover torn, pages weathered. But inside, new writing, faded by rain and wind. Lines written in Ava's looping script. You can't erase empathy. You can only forget it, and forgetting is just the start of remembering. Below that, a final message, written smaller, as if she'd been smiling when she wrote it. This is not a goodbye. It's a frequency. And you're already tuned in. Beckett closed the notebook slowly, pressing it to her chest. She looked up at the horizon, the sun bleeding through the clouds, and whispered, "You won, Ava." A pause. Then softer, "We all did." Years later, when cadets at Fort Valor learned about Black Ridge Outpost, their instructors no longer called it a battle. They called it the listening hour. And when new recruits stood at attention on their first morning, they didn't shout slogans or oaths. They stood in silence for 60 seconds to remember the woman who taught the world that silence is where truth begins. Every soldier learned her story. Every engineer studied her grid. Every leader quoted her words. And every one of them, whether they realized it or not, lived in a world she had remade, one pause at a time. Somewhere in a valley far from civilization, wind passed through the bones of an old transmission tower. It hummed softly, its frequency barely audible. And if you stood close enough, you could almost hear her voice riding the static, quiet, steady, alive. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Sometimes the strongest weapon left to humanity is still the human heart. The camera pans out the world vast, silent, alive again. No heroes. No villains. Just the endless sound of wind moving through the scars of old wars. And the faint, enduring rhythm of empathy that refused to die.